I need all the help I can get. I'm going to get started, and I'll be bringing Brendan up as we get into the meat of this. So what are we going to be chatting about today? I'd like to introduce what I see as some of the major challenges and the problem of SOCs that are looking at cloud environments, which is all about incidents, noise, and tools. And then we're going to bring up Brendan on board. We're going to chat about evidence-based security, and then something that I like to call respond left. I'm going to paint the vision of respond left to wrap us up at the end of the session. Let's get going. Well, we know that so often in security there's an asymmetry, an unbalance. I'm not Im. Im is probably more correct. In any case, what I'm talking about is the fact that there's often a mountain of alerts that we have to deal with when we're looking at a cloud environment, and also a mountain of false positives within that noise. There's often talent and skill shortage specifically for, hey, how can we get great people that are capable and apt of looking at these alerts and, investigating them in real time. And there's growing complexity, not just of our security stack that is securing our cloud environments, but of applications themselves. As we grow to adopt event-driven architecture, I think we can all appreciate that these things aren't getting simpler, especially as all of our organizations say, hey, we want LLMs here and LLMs there, and we start to adopt more and more vector databases because as business says, hey, we need this functionality, we're going to build it, things aren't going to get simpler, right? And unfortunately, attackers have that clear mindset of they don't need to protect everything, they just need the one way in, right? And they've got an increased attack surface that they're now looking at, and also there's an increasing sophistication that we're seeing from the threat actors that are targeting cloud environments. So there's an inherent imbalance, which often leads me to say that I think cloud security is broken. I love all of the cloud tools that are available. I have used a bunch of them, but I think we're now dealing with the fact that I think EC2 had its 18th birthday party this year in August. Lambda had its 7th. Like, this stuff isn't new. And the security tools have had that same kind of age with them, and they've all grown to do phenomenal things with the health of Kubernetes, with the health of an image as you're building it, with the health of your cloud services, with the health of a running instance to know what the health of an EC2 is. But they've all been separated. And so I see a movement across the industry of people that are looking to say, hey, let's get fewer and fewer screens, if at all possible. Gartner believes that there's this movement down from an average of 10 to 3 or 4, 3 or fewer, actually. I think they're a bit generous that it'll be 2026, but we'll see. The problem isn't necessarily that across cloud security we have multiple vendors. It's more that these tools aren't necessarily playing very, very well with each other. Disconnected, disparate. If something does go bump in the night in a cluster, for example, well, I've got to look at the health of that cluster. I've got to look at the services attached in terms of ECR and EKS to look at how well they've been configured, hopefully to the well-architected best practices using the well-architected framework from AWS, which is a phenomenal reference and phenomenal tooling there. But you've also got to look at, well, what's happening within the containers themselves, what's happening at the host layer, is there a vulnerability at the OS and app level, is it in the container image? There's just so many different views that we need to have, right? Unfortunately, cloud tooling is often super noisy. I think if anyone in this room has used a CSPM before, didn't matter who the name was in the top left or top right of that CSPM tool, it would have shown you 1,000 things. Of this is the distance between you and your god of NIST or a SOC or CIS or whatever it might be, right? And often a lot of tooling is mostly built about like, hey, how can we build clean and release clean? Not necessarily, and kind of have that prevention focus, and not necessarily be particularly strong on detection and response. And often, strangely, a lot of cloud security has lacked machine speed capabilities. Now, this is 2 years ago, we asked our own SOC team, as we were on the verge of making some changes in our own stack of the CSPM that we were going to use, because at that time, we didn't have our own CSPM. We asked them what was slowing them down, and it was hunting and investigation and a response that was taking up the majority of their time. The immediate triage didn't take too long. Remediation didn't even take too long. It was those two ones in the middle. And what that meant was that they were never able to get proactive because they had so much time sunk into looking through this mountain of alerts and saying, well, hey, which ones do we actually need to look at? What could happen from these alerts? Is this even real? And then how do we go about responding to that? Unfortunately, when we look at the threat landscape, there has been an increase in breaches. By the way, I'm going to show a couple things about the reality of the cloud threat landscape and the container threat landscape. Please don't take any of this to mean that I believe that this is an insurmountable challenge. It's absolutely not at all. We can all nail cloud security, but I want us to have clear eyes about the nature of the threats that we face so that we know, like, well, what do we need to be prepared for, right? So I'm seeing an increase in breaches. I think that's just because more and more people are heading to cloud, so we're seeing more and more threat actors focus there. If it's true that 19 out of every 20 new workloads is going to head straight to the cloud in the next couple of years, as they're built new, it makes sense that threat actors are targeting there, right? I think there's probably also an increase because of an adoption of scripted tools and a lot of script kiddie-based stuff. I like to just quickly chat about two. We've got great reporting on both of these, AlienFox and FBot. As an example of what's out there from open source tooling that targets cloud environments, if you use a security aggregation tool like Security Trails or LeakIX to find a bunch of targets, here I'm talking about like Joomla, Drupal, WordPress, Magento, OpenCart, vulnerable web frameworks, right? What AlienFox can do from there is dump the config files, pass through that, import Boto3 locally to use the key that it's found, create a new login profile with a hard-coded password. It actually goes and deletes the original, and then it bumps up its own admin access privileges. This isn't Russian, Chinese, hardcore stuff. This is what you can find online for free. But this is the level of sophistication that we now need to go looking for. A lot of people talk to me about, like, hey, when I'm talking about cloud misconfigurations, I need to see how clean we're building. Now we also need to look at, well, if someone's making active changes to your environment, that might show up as a misconfiguration. If we have a slightly more, maybe V1, V2 CSPM, like that might be lost in the noise of like, hey, no, this is a misconfiguration, but not because of how you built it, because of what's been changed, right? Just because I want to nerd out for a second, this one was quite an interesting one. It's a similar kind of Swiss Army knife when it comes to, like, it's a bunch of different tools are based in Predator AI. This guy tries to sell it. I think he sells it for $300 a pop, but he's gone and put a chat interface in front of it. So there's an LLM that you can use in front of the tool set that targets cloud environments to have a conversation about, hey, what should I do next now that I do have these creds? Or what should I do next now that I do have RCE in a cluster? And here's a website that they popped recently. MITRE ATT&CK, these guys don't look at like POCs or what could happen. They look at what has happened. What have we observed in the wild? And they've shown to us there's been a literal expansion of the techniques that we're seeing targeting cloud and container environments. 50 to 64 in the last 2 years, 28 to 39 in the last 2 years. That was updated as recently as 3 weeks ago when V16 of the MITRE was released. There was 2 brand new techniques. People ask me often, hey, you like to talk about sophisticated attacks, unsophisticated attacks. What do incidents actually look like? And I always feel like Professor McGonagall in Harry Potter, where she's like, why is it always you three? It's, why is it always you three? Vulnerabilities, creds, misconfigurations. Like, it's not rocket science, right? And these are the same things that have been around for ages. These are the common challenges, right? All of this bubbles into, clearly we need a CNAPP approach. Gartner's term here, Cloud Native Application Protection Platform. I'm sure you've heard it as much as I have. Really, that's a sort of umbrella view of let's bring in cloud security tooling together, not because we need it in the one screen, but because we need it contextualized to each other and correlated to each other. How can we build clean, release clean, run clean? Now, what does SentinelOne think about all of this? Of course, I'm up here, so I get to be like, we've got the panacea, we've got the cure. I completely appreciate we're a technology company. I'm about to show you a technology approach. Part of why I wanted Brendan to join this talk is because I completely appreciate it's always people, processes, and technology. There's only so much you can do with tech, but hopefully we're going to, a little bit later on, talk about what are some concrete ways to use this tech to start implementing processes with the people that you have. Because it's not just easy enough as buying licenses, right? You got to work with the people you have, and you got to implement some processes. Our proposal, I like to simplify it down to, like, if we're looking at how do we boost SOC, what I want us to do is I want us to get serious about proactive health. That's evidence-based. And when it comes to real-time security, runtime security, I want that to be autonomous and reactive. Now, how do we achieve that? If you ever talk to sellers at my company, they'll tell you that we've got a couple of brand shiny new things that they can sell. An agentless CNAP that's about radically reducing your cloud attack surface, agent-based security that's about stopping threats in real time, as well as we've got some security for cloud object storage. When it comes to, by the way, that cloud workload security, I said that it sits in user mode. We've got 5 years of pedigree with eBPF. Apologies, I just needed to throw that brag in there. I feel like a lot of people are very proud that they've adopted eBPF in the last 2 years. I'm very proud that we've adopted eBPF 5 years back, is when we launched this. Anyway, what I want us to hone in on first is within cloud native security, here's about how do we get evidence-based about proactive health. So it's got all the acronyms that you'd expect: CSPM, KSPM, CIEM, AISPM. We're doing an early release, GAs in like Jan. Container security. So we're looking at images in real time, but also as you build them out. Kind of all of and secret scanning, all of the things that you'd expect. I don't expect to wow anyone or blow you away with this slide. What we do know is that noise is a problem, right? A lot of people spend a lot of time analyzing attack paths, where it's like, hey, what's vulnerable or what's misconfigured, what's risky, and what's the pathway out to the internet. Something that we've done is we've built this offensive security engine to validate these risks. And so what we do in a case like this, we found an attack path, and the offensive engine dynamically generates an attack, a defanged attack, and it runs it on the environment. That's important because also a lot of times your cloud security is going to look at your cloud, but not within the context of your WAF or your firewall or your IPS. And it's like, no, we need that view as well, right? That's something that we really want to focus on, is what's possible from outside. Here, I pulled it up on the screen. You can see at the very top, apologies if this is too small, and we're happy to share this material with you afterwards, but at the top of the screen, you might see a curl with a get. If I was to scroll right, you would see that it's just querying instance metadata. We're checking if, in this case, I believe it's a Metabase vulnerability. Does it allow server-side request forgery? Does it let me ask some things? And at the bottom, we've taken a screenshot of what happened when we ran that. In this case, keys to the kingdom. Key, ID, secret, token. So we've done a few things here, right? We call these verified exploit paths. We want to have nomenclature. Oh, that's a really hard word to pronounce. Nomenclature that differentiates it of like, this isn't an attack path, it's an exploit path, where it's done a few things. One, it's proven that yes, this will happen. Here's what it would look like, and here's the impact. And we then reprioritize this based on this evidence. But we're all about getting that evidence. Marketing at S1 aren't particularly behind me, but I like to call this the so what artifact. Because so often I see communication that's just kind of broken between cloud teams and dev teams and infrastructure teams and engineering teams of not necessarily understanding how those other teams work. And so the security might send 2 pages of CVEs. And the devs are like, well, what of this is publicly accessible? What package, what layer, how exploitable is this? If it is exploited, what's the impact, like what would actually happen? We want to immediately answer that question of so what with a screenshot, if at all possible. So that instead of talking about EPSS score this, or CVE this, or color that, right? Like whatever your racy matrix is to have a conversation internally of the seriousness of an alert, we want to validate it up front. Evidence-based prioritization with verified exploit paths. And I think that's a big way of how you can start getting smart about your proactive health, is starting with evidence. The other half is about, hey, how do we then have autonomous reactive health? I think it's important to note that we need to have autonomous reactive health not just across our cloud environments, but also across, obviously, our developer environments too, and our larger environment, and that we're looking across identities, both human and machine, right? Like, it's not just about people, it's about permissions and privileges. What that looks like for us in terms of our agent-based solution is cloud workload security. I already did the bragging bit of eBPF, so I don't have to do it again. But what's special in here is that it's built to be autonomous, to take actions on its own. That's not about bringing environments down. It's never about bringing down the container. It is about stopping processes as they fire if they're malicious. AI-powered detection and response in real time at machine speed. Now, this is protecting some of the world's largest cloud environments currently, hyper-performant, stable, scalable, pretty low overhead. When it comes to AI and ML, it's great to see that every single vendor in the expo has AI plastered all over their booths. Of course it is, right? Like, I get that it's really popular. We've been in this AI and ML space for years. We have pre-execution, which is all supervised learning, where we're doing things like looking at the entropy, which is weird for us to have a physics, well, it's like a chemistry term, I guess. It's the level of chaos within a given subset, which increases. It's the thing of glasses break. They don't go the other way around. But if you look at the chaos within a file, you can actually make some guesses about whether it's malicious or not. We do a few other things, but this is supervised learning. Over more than 1 billion samples have been fed into this. That's pre-execution. That's before a thing is even clicked or even run. And then we've got unsupervised learning to look at, well, we've got to start we need to start connecting dots of, hey, people are going to do things differently every time. There's going to be idiosyncrasies. The way in which Linux ransomware has rolled out recently has changed quite a bit as well. There's a lot less noise up front before that stuff deploys. Like, they're not around anymore because they were thankfully scared off after Change Healthcare attack, which you probably know quite a bit about coming from this part of the world. But Black Cat's ALPH-V ransomware written in Rust that could target Linux environments as well. The kind of the kind of noise associated with that ransomware before it started encrypting was quite different, and the way in which they ran their campaigns was quite different from previously. In any case, that's where unsupervised ML starts to come really handy. So that's a little bit about how can we be autonomous, how can we be reactive. I do want to pull the AI thread a little bit longer, though. I think as part of being evidence-based and as part of us being autonomous and reactive, we need to also have an intelligent and autonomous way to interrogate the findings. Something that we've got in market is Purple AI, which is not a chatbot because marketing would absolutely kill me if I said those words out loud. It's a conversational interface that we've built on top of everything that we do. So that you can ask plain language queries. We've got quick ways into things, which we call quick starts. Follow-up questions. So if I say, like, hey, I'm looking for curl in the last 72 hours across my EC2 instances, the next follow-up questions would be, do you want to maybe restrict that to IP ranges of countries that you're worried about? Might be one of the suggested next follow-ups, but it kind of follows you along and gives you a few ideas of where you might want to head next in your investigation. That documents itself, and you can save and repeat if there's things that you want to do quite often, specific to your environment, auditable, shareable. You can interact it as you look at an alert. We've seen bash. There was a dangerous reverse shell that we didn't like. We think it's attached to these tactics. You can then go, well, hold on, I see that you stopped something. I see that what these tactics are. Can you tell me a little bit about what happened previously? Or can you tell me a little bit about who these techniques and tactics are associated with? Or can you tell me why we think it's this malicious? Like, show me you're working. In terms of show me you're working, by the way, actually, no, I'll do that next. As a few images to show you what this stuff looks like, I've got up on screen some of the quick starts of like, hey, before you even chat, you may want to start with some IOCs or a specific threat actor or an anomaly. Again, that's pre-populated so that you don't always have to come up with the question yourself if you don't have one. Or you can just go straight ahead and ask that question of like, hey, my boss told me to look for scattered spider. I'm going to look for scattered spider. Or looking for whatever it is that you want to look for. Here's a few example of follow-up questions and what the field looks like, the chat interface. And here's a summarization of events. So obviously we go into security is always incredibly detailed. You can use Purple AI to summarize things. My favorite is that you can also get this to summarize investigations too. If you've gone through and you've done 7 questions that have led you to look at a specific user, a specific environment, and something that you want to then follow up, whether it's an IP you then want to block or whatever it might be, you can say like, hey, can you summarize everything I've done and put that in an email to my boss? Obviously, you want to check it first, but like that's something I think that's quite cool. And then, so the next thing I get asked is this a black box? How does this thing work? Are you worried about hallucinations? I'm not going to go into this in detail today, but something that we are very happy to do is share our weightings, chat about the models that we're using, chat about how we're using AWS Bedrock, chat about how we're using AWS SageMaker, and all of the reference architecture. We're happy to go into a lot of details about what's proprietary, and where we're using other things, and how does it work, and how we're trying to reduce hallucination as much as humanly possible. But I won't chat about that now. What I will do, because I've been much too vendory and chatted to you too much about the stuff that the sellers flog, is bring up Brendan. Brendan, would you mind doing a reintroduction to yourself and start chatting about Relay Network a little bit, please?
I'd be happy to, Chris. So again, I am Brendan Putek. I am the Director of DevOps at Relay Network. So who is Relay Network? What do we do? Relay Network provides a secure and compliant content-rich business feed to our enterprise-class customers, allowing them to connect and engage with their users in workflows and experiences that drive success on their critical business processes. That's what Relay does in a box. Why is a director of DevOps talking to you about security? It's a slightly misleading title. I actually have responsibility for what you might think of all of the ops: cloud ops, DevOps, SecOps, FinOps. I own the entirety of our AWS organization, right? And I have 5 people on my team. There's only 30 engineers in Relay Network, okay? We're not very large, but remember those numbers because they're going to be important. So how do we operate? 1, we are 100% AWS cloud native. Right? We highly utilize the managed services that AWS provides us, because again, 30 engineers total. Our entire stack is built primarily these days on ECS Fargate, right? Utilizing ECR, so we're building our containers in pipeline, again on the AWS tools, right? We are big believers in shift left for security, for our dev operations, for all of those components. So how do we do that? We use our automated gates and checks, right, within GitHub Actions at CI/CD time, right? We utilize our vendor tools, SentinelOne, Sneak, things like that, within our pipelines, doing our container scanning, right, doing secret scanning, items like that, right? And then everything we build is infrastructure as code with Terraform, right? One of our favorite checks is the IAC scanning, right, built into PR time, preventing misconfigurations, preventing, right, vulnerabilities, right, preventing those sorts of items from ever getting out through our stack. As we deploy through our various environments and testing, we do DAS testing at every level, triggered on API updates, on front-end updates, things like that, right? So we are ensuring at every level, we are minimizing threat going to our production environments.
So why don't we wind the clock back a little bit, because SentinelOne's there now, Sneak's there now, Sunray's there now. What
Right.
do things look like a little while ago?
How did things look a little while ago? So we had a series of tools, right? Much like most of the organizations will have, and as Chris talked about, they were non-integrated, they were disparate, right? So Rapid7, CrowdStrike, tools like that, things that are big players in their space, right? Listed at the top, right? That highest quadrant for Gartner, right? The problem we had was that we were overwhelmed by alerts. Remember, there's 5 people on my team, and we're working 5 or 6 different functions, right? When I look at my DAS tool and I see a number of, there are 45,000 findings, what am I supposed to do about that? There's no automation, there's no information, right? I've got to look at them one by one to figure out, are these false positives, right? Is there something here? What level is this actually, right? Like, it becomes overwhelming and, right, everybody ends up paralyzed. How do you even start solving this problem, right? The other thing we were left with is wondering about what were our tools doing, right? CrowdStrike literally told us, hey, if you don't see anything in the UI, that means it's working. That doesn't make any sense. How am I supposed to verify that, right? Trust but verify, something we've all learned, especially in security. Not a big fan of the ostrich algorithm, right, personally. Doesn't work very well. So I talked about the number of alerts, right? That was one tool for our DAS tool. Similar problems across the board, right? And there was no integration between those tools, right? I didn't know, hey, this DAS tool is scanning your front-end API. Can I track that back to a vulnerability in a library? Is something happening there? Because they were totally disconnected. Even the products from within a vendor were totally disconnected from each other. So investigating anything took hours, as Chris showed us with that slide from their SOC, right? 5, 10 hours, right? Sometimes more. Added to that, right? The complexity of what every security organization deals with, right? And how do you get that prioritized? How do you get developers to work on that, to fix those issues, right? Get it through product.
Well, just
right?
throw some brain power at it, right? Be manual.
Right. We're not writing the applications. We don't know how to fix those sorts of things, right? So that whole process becomes extraordinarily lengthy, right? And takes an inordinate amount of time, all of which you're not protected, right? You've got this vulnerability that's potentially exploitable, and you don't know.
And I know that another challenge was resource usage as well. Like at the end of the day, you're paying for resource usage.
Right, well, I'm paying for resource usage. I'm paying for people, right? I'm paying for people that I need to do other things, right? And they're busy trolling through, right, security issues, right?
Yeah, so then obviously we don't need to chat about the process of going to market, but there's been some things that you've now focused on and that you've been working to achieve. Let's chat a little bit about that.
Right, so SentinelOne's a great partner, first of all, right? Supportive, always willing to help, right, move things along. But one of our biggest needs was, how do we validate these risks, right? We all saw, as Chris talked about, the offensive security engine, right? How do we prioritize the most critical items for our small team to focus on, right? How do we then take that information and, as you showed, explain it to the rest of our engineering teams to get it resolved, right? And how do we get that information immediately, right? I talked about the lack of integrations between the tools, right? But it was also lack of integrations with our other vendors, right? Your PagerDuty, your Jira, your Slack, your Teams, whatever you're using, right? For getting that data out, right? So that means it's somebody in there, eyes on, looking at it, doing that research, finding it, right? Validating it, sending it along for the ride, hopefully.
Yeah, I might move on to the next bit of things that you were able to achieve with some of the changes.
Right, so automated security, right? Automation on the right. Getting those things tested, getting those things shut down, right, that are potential vulnerabilities, getting them automatically protected, but with notification they're happening. The ability to go into the platform and see that hey, yeah, this was here. I saw it, but not only did I see it, I saw it get remediated in real time, right? I didn't have to wait 24 hours for an update, right? To say, oh yeah, well, I think we fixed this, right? The Jira issue was closed, but I don't see it yet reflected in my environments. Now it's real time, right? It's automated. I see it almost instantly as soon as it's fixed. And I can validate that. I can close that down. I can take that right to my CISO, and I can say, hey, look, yeah, we did the thing.
Yeah. So we've chatted about how that's helped you with validation, how that's helped you with real-time threat detection. Both of those communicated in stack appropriately, which has let you prioritize and look for things that you need to fix,
Exactly.
as well as communicate what you have done and what the tool's done, and all of that into the same source of data, right?
Into that same source of data. So the security data lake is probably one of my favorite things that SentinelOne offers, because it's a unified collection of all of our data into a single place. Not only do I feed it all of the data from XDR, from CNS, right? I feed it all of the data from my vendors, from Sneak, right? From my DAS tool now, right? The one that I use today as I replace the others, right? It's all there. It's all in one place. I can search it all together, which means that now I can see linkages between data points, right, that I couldn't see before. Hey, I can see that, yes, there is a vulnerability in this library. Yes, I see this threat in this container or on this EC2 instance or right, from my DAS tool in my API, and I can link that directly back to that, right, to that endpoint, right? And then on top of that, I can use Purple AI to make it easy. I don't have to know Power Query. I don't have to know the syntax language. I don't have to know the syntax of the data. I can just go ask Purple AI, and it does it for me. It pulls it all up, pulls it together, summarizes my report, tells me what I need to know. So now I've taken all of that hunting time, right, and shrunk it way down. I get immediate alerts, right? I get unified data and the ability to go query it in real time with natural language, right? No more hunting, right? And then I take all of that together and I export it out through an integration, right, to Jira, right to my dev team, right?
And let's maybe chat about that, because part of what you've been trying to achieve is quicker communication between teams and better communication between teams, right?
Correct.
Like bringing them closer together.
Yeah, so...
Not that you've got hundreds of people
right,
within the teams that you do have.
So my goal, right, is to divide and dissolve that friction between security and engineering. As I mentioned, I have 5 engineers, and that's technically including myself, right? That's not a lot of people to manage things on that scale. I'd like to shift left and down, which is how I think about it, right, to the rest of my engineers, making these tools available. If I can take that critical alert when it happens, right, package up all that data together, right, from Purple AI, that summary, that linkage, a graph, right, all that information together, send it out through PagerDuty directly to the team that owns that stack, right, that owns that application component, right? I bypass all of that investigation. I bypass all of the friction with product and with the other engineering teams on, oh, I got an injection into my sprint, right? Like, how do I manage this? What's the priority, right? It goes right to the person on call, right? It gets right in based on priority. It gets fixed, right? I get to remove that entire problem statement.
To step back from the vendor ledge, regardless of who you choose, in all of your spaces, right? I think what we all have to focus on is bringing teams closer together. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it may have actually gone out of your lips. I'm sure you guys heard it from elsewhere. The amount of security folk that go, I don't know what those DevOps cowboys are doing. The amount of DevOps people that are like, security just slow us down and they're useless and I don't know what they're worried about. Like, there's quite often broken racy matrices between these teams. I think We can build better cross-functional workflows if we have a focus on evidence. However you get that evidence and however you get that prioritization and validation, I think that's so key. Because what's not working is sharing information that isn't relevant and isn't contextual. If we're talking to someone about what we need them to change, it needs to be within their workflow, how they can change it, package layer, why it's serious, how we need to go about doing it. Often I'll talk about like, hey, is the risk real and does it require focus? What would an exploit look like? What was that impact? And that kind of, that so what approach I had before. All of this is so key to actually getting things done. Of the like, is this serious enough for us to fix before lunch? Rather than how are we going to spin our wheels? So often I see us spinning our wheels trying to get clean in a cloud environment before any activity happens. But we're also often reacting to live fire events of, hey, we're seeing IPs that we're unhappy with, or we're seeing activity we're unhappy with, and we're not leveraging those learnings, because so often I see SecOps teams that are responding to fires by looking at prod environments, and none of those learnings are then being shared with infrastructure or engineering or cloud ops or DevOps of like, hey, we had a fire here, and this is actually going to lead to the next chat. First of all, I think what we need, the cure really here isn't technology, it's how can we get what we need in terms of what is the half page or the 1 page that we need to communicate, and communicate that in stack. Right person, right time, but super importantly, right things that we're telling them. That's an incredibly technical term, right things to communicate. But I think, evidence is how you get there. But anything actually you want to jump in there?
Yeah.
You don't have to if you don't.
No, I absolutely would, right? As I talked about, right, my engineering team is 30 people. I have 5 people on my team, no SOC, right? But I think at an organization of any size, right, we're all busy, right? We've all got our priorities, right? Handling critical injections, fires, right? Doing that is a stress that none of us need on either side of that problem, right? So by simplifying this process, by removing the friction and the headaches, right? Providing all of that packaging together, right? We bypass it. It's a happy work environment for everyone, yeah. Right? When we do that, right now, I look at that and I go, okay, I don't have, right, 5 people who are primarily responsible for SecOps, right? I have 30. My entire engineering team is now primary responsible for SecOps, right? That's a huge increase in resources to spend time on that, but we've done it in such a way that it's removed the overhead, right? Now, they spend very little time solving these problems, thanks to technology, right? And instead, they focus on what the business needs them to do, right? Delivering value, delivering features, right? Serving client needs, which at the end of the day is what it's all about.
And if I was to take it a little step further in terms of a framework for all of this, obviously, whenever there is a little fire, whenever there is something that is going wrong, obviously you want correlation, context, what all is happening, where you want visibility, right? Ideally, you also want that autonomous reactive health that I was talking about, of like you not needing to have eyes on, having actions taken on your behalf at machine speed to stop things if they're malicious. But really, as we start to look at response and remediation, I need us to harness learnings. We're not often harnessing the learnings from the things that are happening of, hey, if something has happened, why did it happen? Vulnerability, misconfiguration, risk, credential, like what was it? What I want us to do is get that learning, identify where that is in prod, and shift to the pipeline. Obviously, because we don't want to always be dealing in prod. Like, if there's something that's wrong, I want to clean that up in CloudFormation or Terraform. I want to go to the source. And the more that we can build this connective tissue between our prod environment back to our pipeline from a security lens, but more importantly, that connective tissue between those that are wearing security hats and those that are wearing infrastructure hats and DevOps hats and cloud hats, I think we just start to solve a lot of our problems of this respond left.
So I think we've all seen this image before. Right? This is the standard image for DevOps, right? So integrating security into that same process, right, solve some of these problems, as Chris said. Yes, you need to know that your production environment is safe, right? That is problem statement number one, right, for everybody. So the autonomous tools, the autonomous remediation, right, is a key component of that, right? Something that SentinelOne offers, and it's a phenomenal offering for that. But
we're only paying him in minimum one cocktail later on, by the way.
Right, but
that's it. That's it.
You do have to capture that information. You have to respond to it left. If you're building, especially as a mature cloud environment, right, you're doing everything as infrastructure as code, right? You're doing your testing, your integrations, right? You've got to take that back. Okay, this happened, right? Take it back, fix it here. Don't rely on the tool to do it for you, right? Because as you mentioned earlier, right, I don't want to say we're fighting a losing battle, but attackers only have to win once.
Yeah.
We have to win every time, right? And that means that we have to be proactive about everything that we do to stay ahead.
And that's the chat that we wanted to have today. How do we want to rebalance that asymmetry? It's by establishing, where possible, accelerated timelines through that autonomous reactive health and accelerated timelines through context, correlation, and an evidence-based approach. All of this really in service of building better RACI matrices and building better workflows and building better working relationships. I never speak to an organization that says, help me, Chris, I'm missing these acronyms of cloud security. It's, I'm missing these connections between my security team and engineering, or DevOps, or cloud, or infra, or whatever it might be. Or we're dropping too much time in investigation, or we're dropping too much time in response, whatever it might be. We're always going to have growing complexity of our cloud environments, but hopefully we can start to simplify the tech stack we're using for security, but also simplify the processes that we have to achieve the security outcomes that we want to achieve. That's been us. I'll pop one forward just to say thank you ahead. I've been Chris. Brendan's been Brendan. If you want to chat to us, please do. But yeah, that's